Thank you for coming today. As you can see, my title is Reclaiming the Wasted Years, Wasted in inverted commas, purposely. So we're halfway through Mental Health Awareness Week, and as James said, there's been a lot of events going on, and I hope that you've managed to get to some other events and that you'll be planning to go to some more further on in the week. So what am I doing here today? I'm here to talk to you about my journey from mental illness to employment. And as I said, I'm calling it the Reclaiming the Wasted Years because I spent many years as a patient in the mental health system where my plans, hopes and dreams never came to be realised. I lost my career right at its very beginning, and it's true to say that mental illness impacted on every area of my life: work, relationships, socialising, finance and where I lived. So during those years in the mental health system, one of the main things that was constantly on my mind was the fact that I was not working. I'd always been very driven and wanted to succeed and take that logical step from doing teacher training to actually doing the job. It was really hard not being able to do that, and very soon I kind of felt left behind as my other friends from uni all seemed to have moved away to take up their teaching posts and other jobs. There were many years during those wasted years where I didn't want to go out or meet new people, because one of the first questions, and I'm sure you've had this before, whatever your situation is, what do you do? And as I was unemployed, the first response I had in my head was, well, I don't do anything. And at the time, I really felt that those years of not working were completely being wasted. As I go through what I'm going to say for the next few minutes, I'll be challenging whether or not those years were in fact wasted. So for the time that we have, I'm going to look briefly at whether employment is good for us and our mental health. Those of you that were at the talk before, you will have heard that mental health in the workplace is really rife, and work is a great source of stress. I'm not going to say I disagree with that, but I'm trying to argue the opposite in this talk. So I'm going to tell you about whether mental health is good for us, work is good for us. I'll spend a bit of time talking to you about the background of how I came to find myself in the mental health system, and then I'll tell you how I managed to get back to work to where I am today. So just to give you a question of timescales, I'm going to focus on the time from when I graduated to when I got my first paid job. So we're looking from 1991 to 2008. But don't worry, I'm not going to give you a blow-by-blow account of 17 years of my life. So is work good for us? Again, we've heard slightly the opposite this morning, but it is good. So during the period of time that I'm talking about, just to mention, because it's relevant for later on, I got involved in some campaigns, training and public speaking activities around mental health, welfare reform and employment. And one of those was a meeting in London with Dame Carol Black in 2008. It was a discussion following the launch of a document, Working for a Healthier Tomorrow, which was a review of mental health, the health of Britain's working population. The people who were invited to the meeting that I went to were people like myself who were currently experiencing mental health issues and were unemployed. And a large proportion there as well in that meeting were people who'd lost their jobs through becoming mentally unwell. So in this report, Carol Black said, for most people, their work is a key determinant of self-worth, identity and standing within the community, besides, of course, material progress and a means of social participation. I'm not sure I would have quite phrased it like that myself. It's kind of a bit wordy, isn't it? And then again, looking at my preparation for this day, I was looking at what people have said. I found a professor, Marie Yahoda, who wrote a book on employment and unemployment, and she said, work plays a vital part in all our lives. For the individual, it provides an opportunity to earn wages, which in turn provides greater financial security. It also provides social status, an identity, a sense of achievement, and a means of structuring one's time. So as I said, I looked at quite a lot of papers on employment and realised it was probably rather boring to go through all those kind of things. And I thought, actually, how would I phrase that myself? So to say, why does work matter to me? At a base level, and don't take this the wrong way, it gives me something to do. It gives all of us something to do. Just what, rather than staying at home or working or doing something else. But more importantly for me, having my history, it means that I'm no longer dependent on the benefit system with all its rules and confusing systems. I've got more choice and more freedom to do what I do with my finances. And it really helps me have some worth, because for years I felt I had no worth. And it was important to me to feel that I could contribute to society. Work opens up my world to meeting new people and new opportunities. It takes me out of myself and exposes me to doing new things and hearing new ideas. And I have a reason to get up in the morning, and that was really important. At this point, I have to say, my getting up in the morning is not really like that even now. It's more like this. Bearing in mind that clock there says 10 to 9. So work gives me a purpose. So having many years when I was not working, it was really hard to keep motivated to do anything. And obviously a lot of time during those years, through my mental illness, I wasn't well enough to work at all anyway. And that impacted on the depression and the sense of being useless and life feeling pointless. Some of you here, I don't know who my audience is, I know some of you, will know from your own experience what I'm talking about. But those of you who are fortunate enough never to have been unemployed and have not had a mental health problem, just want you to listen to this. This is where I need to disappear.
I'd like you to imagine that you're a single person living alone. You have a good job, decent salary, nice house. You go out quite a bit, theatre, cinema, eating out. You rent a car, have a foreign holiday at least once a year, and then the unexpected happens. The company goes bust and you have no job. You don't benefit financially as the company was in a mess and owed thousands to its suppliers. You are unemployed for the first time in your life and you're not getting any younger. To start with, you're shocked, then angry, and feel very strange when the alarm goes off at 6 a.m. and you don't really have to get up. You go to the job centre eventually, and it feels uncomfortable and degrading. You're a proud person and don't feel you identify with the others around you. You are shocked by the amount that the law says you need to live on. Live? Who can live on that? Who can even exist on that? You are determined to get another job. After all, you've had years of experience. Employers will be fighting over you, won't they? It's a competitive market now. You're competing with the whiz kids who have grown up with technology. And yes, they do seem as if they're all still kids. You search papers, professional journals, internet, and apply for literally hundreds of jobs. You go out and buy a new interview suit with your savings, which is starting to diminish. You summon up your energy and put on an air of enthusiasm, confidence, and professionalism. You will get a job. But as time goes by, interviews are few and far between. Rejection letters litter the doormat, and many applications evoke no response. Not even, I'm sorry to say that you've been unsuccessful in your application on this occasion. There's no reason to get up, so you don't until half the day is gone. You look at the doormat and all you see are brown envelopes, which you know are either rejection letters or bills. You've lost hope of finding an invitation to interview, so you don't bother to look. You don't want to go out, as you might meet friends or former colleagues who ask what you're doing. Your purpose for getting up is gone. Everything starts to slip. You have no routine. You smoke more to pass the time, watch daytime TV with a vacant stare. You can't even be bothered to eat much. You've become isolated, and over time has sunk into depression.
So that's a kind of fairly fictitious, but probably quite true to life example of someone who came into the mental health system through losing their job. So it's just to give you kind of the other argument, because I'm speaking from a position of no employment to employment. So those of you who are working, it's very easy for those things to happen. It could happen to all of us, and as we heard earlier, the proportion of people at any one time who suffer with a mental health problem is very high. So for me, the place of feeling completely hopeless and without a future was one where I'd never imagined I'd be. Although when I look back, I can probably see how I got to that place. I'd grown up in a one-parent family with a mother who had mental health problems herself, but never chose to receive help. Life was quite tough growing up, We relied on the benefits system, and I lived in constant fear that my mum would either leave because she couldn't cope with us two young children, or that she wouldn't survive the overdoses that she took. My sister and I had to learn to be very independent from a young age, too young really. And as a child, I strove for perfection in a bid to be noticed, affirmed and recognised, but it never really happened. When I was at university, that's probably when my problems started to happen. I became ill at university. What happened at that time, I was doing a teaching course, 4-year degree course. It was very, very tough, as any of you students here know how tough a course can be. My nan had died, which was very difficult, and I was having relationship problems. I was engaged at the time, and that was all going pretty badly wrong. So with all those things happening, always without realising, I literally stopped functioning. I couldn't work, I couldn't concentrate, I hardly slept, I forgot to eat, and I was scared because I had no idea what was going on. I remember cycling to the university library, the medical library in Southampton, to find out what was wrong with me. I thought there must be a book that can tell me what's going on. And in the end, I went to the doctor, who gave me some tablets, didn't know what they were for really, and they produced intolerable side effects, and that made me function even less. By this time, I'd started to secretly cut myself to self-harm in a bid to manage how I was feeling. I had no idea why I was doing it, and I was pretty freaked out by it. In the early days, I honestly thought I was the only person in the world who self-harmed, hence keeping it quiet. But strange, for those of you that don't know about self-harm or don't understand it, it actually did help, strange and shocking that might seem. I'm not going to say a lot more about self-harm today, because that's not the talk really, but if anyone wants to talk to me about it afterward, that's fine. So leading up to my finals in university was really tough. I remember being in the university library 2 days before my education exam, and I just thought, I just can't do this anymore, I'm going to fail, I just can't do it. And that day I self-harmed and nearly lost my life, so it was a very serious episode of self-harm. Miraculously, I got through my exams and graduated, but almost straight away I was thrust into the bewildering world of the mental health system, and it is bewildering straight away. My first admission to hospital was absolutely terrifying. I honestly didn't know who I was anymore. My future had gone, I felt I'd lost everything, I had no job, nowhere to live. My closest friend at uni had disowned me when she learned about my mental health problems. And that's another thing about mental health problems. Your world shrinks, you lose friends, and your social circle gets very small. My relationship ended, and I found myself living in a tiny cold bedsit. My self-harm escalated, and I made another attempt on my life. I became wrapped up in this mental health world, which was actually very small and very suffocating. I had inpatient admissions. I went to a day hospital, I was given medication and more medication. I saw a whole load of health professionals. I didn't want to eat, I was tired all the time, and I found it so hard to motivate myself to even get up. I didn't do normal things anymore. I didn't want to go out because I was ashamed. I was ashamed of who I was and was frightened that people would judge me or laugh at me. I tried to hide the fact that I wasn't well and was terrified that if people knew about the self-harm, they would see me as mad or dangerous. That's not true, by the way. Immediately after graduation, I spent 8 months every day in a psychiatric day hospital. And after that, I felt I was okay, or I decided I was okay. I didn't want to be in the mental health system anymore. I started doing voluntary work in schools to get back into teaching. I became a private maths teacher, and that's probably the only mad part about me, that I really love maths. And I actually started thinking, now I can get on and apply for teaching jobs. I did the maths, it was a source of income, but actually earning the money was a bit of a pain actually, because the complication of being on benefits and earning money made it almost too stressful to do. So I carried on doing it, but navigating the benefit system was a nightmare and very stressful. And any of you that know, work with people who have this experience yourself, you'll know the whole benefits, filling in forms, is a vast jungle of confusion as far as I'm concerned. So life was really tough and still quite stressful. I was still living in a bedsit, and I had no support really from family because they were here back in Poole and I was in Southampton. And most of my friends had moved after university. My degree in subsequent tutoring and voluntary work got me interviews in local schools, so I actually got to the point where I was shortlisted and got interviews, and I was desperate to move back here from Southampton because I just wanted to be in my familiar surroundings, I guess. My interviews at schools went actually quite well, but I never secured a teaching post. And when it came to the part in the interview where I was asked about my 1 year out of employment, I kind of stumbled and said, well, I had a little bit of stress, and then tried to move on without having to say anything else. So each time I was unsuccessful, I asked for feedback after the interviews, and it was always, you were a very strong candidate, but the other person just had the edge. I could never prove that I'd been discriminated against, so I kept going until my final chance for the next school year, Starfield Junior School, if anyone knows that. And end of interview, it was a no. At that point, because I was on whatever it was, job seekers allowance, the job centre pretty much demanded, because I wasn't getting any jobs, that I retrain. And I thought, I've only just done a 4-year degree course, I really don't want to retrain in anything. But I had no choice to keep claiming the benefit, and that's all I had to live on. So I was sent on a Business Administration NVQ Level 2 course with a group of people, many of whom were actually quite experienced administrators and were unemployed, so we were doing courses to keep their skills up. If I was being cynical, I would say that a lot of us, the administrators particularly, were on courses like that to lower the unemployment figures, because if you're on a course, you're not technically unemployed. For me on this course, although it was only level 2, I was starting right at the bottom. I didn't even know where the keys were on the keyboard, that's how bad I was. So my typing was like this, and I was way behind everyone else. So I had to work really hard. I didn't particularly enjoy it, I didn't really want to do admin work, but I did it and I passed the course. And then I applied for 84 jobs in basic admin and got 1 interview. And it went okay, but I was unsuccessful because they said I needed to get some experience. So that experience there, I'd retrained, I'd done something else, I was prepared to do, a different job to what I wanted to do, and it was 84 applications, it nearly finished me off. I couldn't do anymore. So as you can imagine, it really got me down, and over time my mental health deteriorated to such an extent that I felt completely and utterly useless. And I took an overdose, and that was the overdose which actually nearly did claim my life. So thankfully it didn't. So this isn't me, but this is a picture. This is kind of how I felt, really, just awful. And after that overdose, you have to get through that process as well. So the immediate aftermath of that experience was possibly the most lonely in my life, and that's why that picture resonates with me. I was still living in Southampton and was discharged from hospital. And it was the middle of winter, I remember it really well, and there was snow on the ground. I had no coat with me, or I'd just been taken to hospital. I had to walk back in that freezing cold weather to the bedsit. And I just felt, rubbish. Mental health had taken away my dignity, my sense of worth, and my hope. I rarely received any compassion from nurses, and this is just a criticism of nurses if they're only here. Because some of them said, you're just a time waster, and I had nurses saying, there are people at this hospital that are really ill. And in some ways, at that time I didn't blame them. I felt really ashamed of what I was doing and how I was. I guess sometimes I felt I didn't really deserve any kindness anyway. But those times when nurses really were very kind and very compassionate, I was just so grateful, and I can't tell you how much that helped. When I think back, and this isn't for sympathy, I do wonder how I kept going at times. I felt trapped by my circumstances, and I lacked the energy and motivation to do very much. But after time, and I don't know where that came from, the energy, the motivation, could have been people praying, because that's part of my experience as well. I tried to build in what I kind of called appointments in my week to set myself goals, but it was really hard because it was only me directing myself. Often I find myself cycling around the streets aimlessly just to pass the time. I started having more contact with 2 friends here in Bournemouth from church, but it was hard, it's sort of a distance to get support other than the phone really. So I was really wanting to get back to Poole where there were people that I knew. These friends from Poole, when they saw where I was living in Southampton and heard what was going on where I was living, they strongly advised me to move back to Poole. And just to give you an insight, this is how mental health is affected by where you live. I mean, this is quite extreme, but I was living in a house of 7 bedsits. I was the only female, and the other tenants included a drug dealer, a young man of 17 that had been captured by the police for joyriding about 28 times, I think it was, a man with psychosis, which I had no experience of and terrified me, and then there was a guy with depression who we had similar experiences in terms of we were unemployed. He was very depressed, and he made many attempts on his life and sadly went on to succeed in taking his life. So that situation was really, really awful, and in the end, I was pretty much, very much persuaded to come back to pool, whatever the circumstances. And again, the only accommodation, oh, that's what I want to do, not that side. The only accommodation I could find was a damp flat with no heating. It was bigger than the bedsit, but it didn't have much else going for it. The benefit system was the barrier. There were hardly any choices for private renting if you were on benefits. So, as I said before, having a reasonable, I'm not talking about palace, but a reasonable place to live is really important for your mental well-being. This flat in Ashley Cross where it was so depressing, and after 3.5 years it was deemed as uninhabitable because it broke every health and safety law imaginable. So I'd lived there for 3.5 years and it was pretty grim. In terms of benefits, I wasn't eligible for incapacity benefit as it was, so my income was quite low. And as I said, I had to fill in loads of forms and it was just very stressful. After I'd had 2 inpatient admissions at St Anne's here, it was decided that I attend a mental health day centre. Of course, those places, such as they were, don't exist anymore. I had this really scary social worker who was like a head mistress. She came and assessed me at home, and then on the day of my first visit to the day centre, en route in the car, she announced that we weren't going to the day centre, and that she was going to take me to see the manager of the older person's day centre, not because I was old, but with a view to doing some voluntary work. So I went from this, I'm going to the day centre to sort of be looked after and protected, but no, I was going to do some voluntary work without any notice or any preparation, so that completely freaked me out. I did it. I was up and down my mental health during that time, but I ended up working there for 2.5 days a week for just over 6 years. I worked my way up from making the tea to running my own craft group. And I have to say, I wouldn't have chosen to work with old people, but they were actually great fun. Really did enjoy that. So you can see by this time, although I wasn't great, I certainly wouldn't have been able to hold down a teaching job. I was improving and I was a little bit more motivated. I was still finding life a real battle, and at that time I was still undergoing therapy, and sometimes my self-harm got out of hand, and so I was admitted to hospital again. So somewhere around 1997 I got involved in the Poor Mental Health Service User Forum and ended up becoming chair, so I've kind of had a lead role in that. And part of that involved going to clinical governance meetings and meetings called the Acute Care Forum at St Anne's. And it was about being the voice of the service users. It wasn't about my opinion particularly, it was about speaking up for fellow patients. And then in 1999 I was volunteering at the Pool Day Opportunity Service managed by the mental health organisation Rethink. So I guess at that time I was getting quite busy really comparatively. I had 2 voluntary jobs, I was attending meetings, and by then I was also being involved with staff training in mental health, just talking about my experiences, which in those days was very nerve-wracking. Not quite so much now, but still pretty bad. But at the same time, as I said, I had years of therapy and I was still doing that, and that therapy was tough because it demanded that I face really painful issues, and sometimes facing the painful issues just to block out those feelings of distress or whatever it was, I self-harmed, so that was still an ongoing problem for me. So what I was doing made my days seem quite full, but there were many times when I thought, I just can't do this, so I kind of withdrew a bit. So it was a really up and down kind of situation. And always in the back of my mind, I was, will I ever be able to get a job? And sometimes it was no chance. And being in the mental health system, although it was chaotic and difficult and the benefits and all that kind of stuff, it felt quite safe in a strange kind of way. Or perhaps, I think familiar is a better word to use. I was living in a fairly small and sheltered world where most of the time I probably felt that I existed rather than lived, so it was kind of quite small. I was going out to do voluntary work, and I'd like to think I generally looked okay, and you wouldn't have been able to pick me out from a lineup of sane people to people with mental health problems. But a lot of the time, doing that voluntary work, I felt quite drained and unable to manage. So quite often I couldn't sustain 2 consecutive days of voluntary work or anything. I had to have a break in between. And again, I thought, will I ever be able to get back to work? So sometimes, as I said, it was really up and down. Sometimes I felt okay and I was getting somewhere. Other times I felt I had real setbacks. And then again, even when I managed to achieve anything, when I stood up in front of a group of NHS staff and talked about mental illness, I kind of didn't feel that I'd achieved anything. When I got home, I kind of felt empty, and I didn't trust that the competent part of me, the part that can talk in front of people, was real. I thought I was just kind of some fraud, and felt like if people really knew me, they would know. I'd be found out and they'd know that I was rubbish. I actually still feel a bit like that now. At the time, I have to say, although I felt safe, I didn't like the life I was living. I really did want to get back to work, but I couldn't see how I could get through all the barriers. As I said, I'd lost all my confidence, and I feared that the jump from being on benefits to full-time work would just be too much. But if I was on part-time work, would I be able to pay my bills? And who would employ me anyway, of course? And many times, as I said, lots of times, I'd just slip back into hopelessness. However, you all know the end of the story, because I'm alive, I'm here, and I have a job. So what kept me going and what helped me to move forward? So I want to mention, excuse my voice a minute, I want to mention a few things. So as I said earlier, there were a small number of friends here in Bournemouth who stuck by me and believed in me, and were certainly those people who kept me hanging in there. Without them, I seriously doubt that I would be here today. Some of them were from my church, and they were a huge source of encouragement. So having people around you that, even if you push them away, don't give up is absolutely crucial. And some of the therapy I had was crucial too to my recovery. Some of it was really hard, but I stuck with it and worked hard with it. I realised probably a little bit down the line that you get out of therapy what you put into it. I actually hated some of it, but I persevered. The biggest challenge was DBT, which is called dialectical behavioural therapy. I haven't got time to talk to you about that now, but it was for me the key that helped me manage and stop the self-harm. And also, it was important, when I could, to keep my body and mind active. I went to the gym a lot, and as I didn't drive, cycling was my transport. I did adult education courses, I did the European computer driving licence, I did a counselling course, which probably wasn't the most sensible thing to do at the time. I did a certificate in community mental health, and I went to a positive living course, and then the next time it was run, I co-led it as well, so that was really good. But the most rewarding thing for me, perhaps, and the biggest confidence builder, was getting involved with Rethink Mental Illness, which is a national mental health charity. Some of my things I'm going to talk about are on this display here, so if you want to look at them afterwards, you're very welcome to. So I had the privilege of being involved in campaigns and speaking at events and conferences. And although each time I was racked with nerves and thought I couldn't do it, with support it usually went okay. And for me, it was getting my voice heard, that's what I wanted to do. But it was also, more importantly perhaps, getting a voice out there for those who couldn't speak for themselves, and trying to influence those at policy level to really think about the issues facing those battling with mental illness and trying to get back to work. The first meeting was at Westminster with the then Shadow Minister for Disability. I raised the issue of pre-employment questionnaires and how they had real potential to disadvantage people with mental illness. So we're talking about a questionnaire you get before interview that asks you about your health, and if you say yes, I have a mental illness, the chances are you probably won't get shortlisted. So we talked about that, we raised that issue, and that discussion actually continued with the campaign team, and we did actually have significant influence in getting the law changed, and there's an article about that. I also got to speak at 2-party political conferences, not with any political allegiance myself in these situations. I just thought, I don't care where I talk, I'll talk wherever let me have a voice. And that was really exciting, quite scary but quite exciting. Rethink worked with the Long-Term Conditions Alliance and the Sainsbury Centre for Mental Health on the Fringe event series for winning votes for mental health. And in a small way, I mean, I wasn't changing the world, but I felt that I was getting the voice of mental health at the heart of policy in debate. I'd filled in loads of patient satisfaction questionnaires myself at a local level, but I thought, I wanted to do something at a different level, and I had that opportunity, which was great. I went to another meeting in London with Mind and the Department for Work and Pensions, and I don't know who's in this audience, but I was absolutely horrified at how little the DWP had in their understanding of mental health issues. So here I am at the Lib Dem Conference. This is Norman Lamb here, who at that time, he was the Lib Dem Shadow Health Secretary, and he joined in the health debate at that time. I know this picture looks like I'm singing, but I was actually giving my little speech there. And just to talk to you about some of the other people in the picture. So this guy here, second from right, he was a Labour councillor in Haringey who had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and he talked about his story and the discrimination that he received. And then this guy, look at this guy here, next to Norman Lamb, he used to work in a high-powered communications job, and he suffered from stress, and like we heard in the session before, he took just a week off work and didn't tell his employers what that was about. He only took a week off so that he could self-certificate, and when he came back from work he had his work appraisal, which went really very well. At a later stage he then chose to disclose to his boss that he had had a bit of stress, and that's why he'd been off. And then all of a sudden his appraisal was reviewed, and they said no, they had to adjust some of the things on the appraisal, and what they'd said wasn't actually correct, and he was dismissed. And as a result, over time he experienced a full psychotic episode and he became suicidal. And at the time of the conference, this is 2008, he was fighting his case at an employment tribunal. And I always wonder whether he, how he did with that, but I guess I won't know that. Speaking at the conference, these conferences, because of the publicity with the campaigns team, this gave me my first experience of being a cover girl, which I'm very proud of. Picture of it there. We did a campaign about mental health being the Cinderella service, so we had to dress up as Cinderella characters. I was the fairy godmother with my wand. And this is Mick Clegg here putting his pledge to support mental health into our inflatable pumpkin. So that was very exciting. Never thought I'd be a cover girl. Delusional, I think I am actually. So speaking at the conference, as I said, it's an amazing opportunity. And in the time that I was given, I didn't have a lot of time, but I packed as much in as I could. So I talked about issues of stigma, discrimination, waiting lists for treatment, the difference in funding for treatment for physical illness and mental illness. I talked about the benefit system and mental health and employment. So that's probably about, it was more than 5 minutes, but I tried to get in as much as I could. And as I said earlier, I guess it didn't change the world, as much as I'd liked it to have done, but it did, I think it did contribute to the debate. It was a great experience, an amazing opportunity. And again, I'm not going to say too much about that, but that's the Labour Party conference that I did as well. That's Ivan Lewis on the right-hand side. Again, some dreadful experiences from those people sitting there talking alongside me. So that's kind of a bit of publicity stuff. So all this is going on, so how did I actually get back to work? So some of you here, some of you very much know this, I'm employed here at Bournemouth University. I've been working here for 7 years, properly employed, but I've been working here since about 2002, where I started coming in and talking to students about my experiences, talking to students who were training nurses for mental health nursing and social work students. And also ran with some colleagues a course to get other service users and carers involved in speaking to students here at the university. And I'll just do a quick plug for this carer and service user partnership which we have at Bournemouth University, which has a group of 75 carers and service users from all walks of life who input into all our undergraduate programmes. So before I actually was employed, A chap called Clive Matthews, who works here at university, he came to the drop-in where I was volunteering, and he came to talk to us about what do we think mental health nurses need to be taught. So he was asking our advice on the curriculum. He then invited me to come and talk to post-registration nurses about self-harm. I'd love to tell you that story. I'll tell anyone if they want to hear it afterwards, but I haven't got the time. But it was quite terrifying. It got off to a bit of a shaky start, but it was okay in the end. So that was my first experience at university. So between that first experience and being employed, I had many visits to the job centre, which involved, I have to say, many tears about whether I could do it, many fears about taking the first step, many fears about getting off the benefit system, whether I could manage. And the whole thing was very tiring and exhausting. And I was thinking, could I manage financially? What if I couldn't handle work? And what if I failed and I was back where I started? And the question I asked myself, starting a job here as I did, as a part-time, hourly paid contract with pretty much no security, was that a brave step or was it just plain stupid? So, from the job centre during this time, I was plunged into the back-to-work stream with appointments with a disability employment advisor, courses on job preparation, condition management, in-work support, managing your anxiety, lift your mood, working well and communicating with confidence. I think that's all of them. I was actually thinking, when I was writing this and getting a bit worried about today, whether I needed a refresher course in some of these, particularly anxiety. It was really hard doing that because all those things were supposed to prepare me for work, and then when you've done, you pass the courses and here we are ready for work. But there was still that doubt whether who was going to employ me, would anyone, and how was I going to convince them? There were some experiences, just a couple to tell you, where the job centre made me really annoyed. One woman suggested that I do some voluntary work, and I told her that I'd already done 12 years voluntary work and was really wanting to do some paid work. Now, I didn't really mind what it was, to be honest, at the time, but she suggested that I was aiming a little too high at this point. So that I didn't find terribly helpful. Another advice, this is my favourite, another advisor suggested that I do some educational courses to make my CV more attractive to employers. So she offered me literacy and numeracy courses. And no disrespect to people that do those and those courses, but I'd qualified with an education degree, so I wasn't sure how I would benefit from that. So one of the good people in the job centre was a disability employment advisor. She was very kind, very human, understanding and knowledgeable. And she helped me work out all the benefits stuff, because it is really complicated. And I had to think of things like, when you're on certain benefits, you get council tax reduction, you don't pay it. So if I worked, I'd have to work to cover that as well. So there's all these different complications. And they have calculations of the benefit system where you can work out average earnings and whether you'll be able to survive. And it was about surviving, it was about paying the bills. It wasn't about earning thousands and thousands. So that was quite hard. So when we did our calculations and looked at working at the university for 16 hours a week to start with, we worked out that I would be 40 pence a week better off through working. So, some people might say, well, big deal, what about, that's, and that actually is a good point where some people would rather stay on benefits because financially you're not any better off. But for me, it wasn't about the 40p, it wasn't about money really, it was about actually getting back into the world of work and thinking that I was doing something. So, May the 1st, 2008, I was employed by Bournemouth University, and I hope I still am after this talk. Got some of my work on it here. So, as it's been such a long journey, quite a tough one, I wondered if I could help other people in some way. I produced a leaflet which some of you have got on your tables. I wrote this in 2008 and I haven't changed, I wanted to edit it but I didn't change it at all because this is what I did at that time. The only thing I've changed is that it's got my email address if anyone wants to contact me about anything I've said today. So I produced that to use as a tool to talk to other people who've been in my position, were in my position, looking to get back to work, to be really human, just a source of encouragement and a kind of tool to talk to people. So again, I had a real privilege to talk to people in the mental health community team and service users about them getting back to work and sharing some of my experiences. And just to say, it wasn't about, people used to say, well, you've got a degree, it's okay for you. It's not about qualifications, well, it wasn't for me. It was about facing my fears, it was about taking tiny steps, it was about regaining that confidence that I'd lost and believing in myself, and that was the hardest thing. So when I looked at the leaflet, when I was preparing for this, dragged it out, you can see that I wrote, was it worth it? And I said 7 years ago, I did think, wow, I never thought I'd get this far, and I don't, trivialise that because of how I was, and my mental health problems were quite severe at times. I never dreamed that I'd get to the point of being employed at all by anyone. And I think now, being, 7 years on from 2008, I can probably say the same again. I don't think I would have got this far from 2008, so I'm surviving, which is good. So, and just to say, in terms of people often ask me, how's your mental health now? I have sustained 7 years of employment with no periods of work, off work for mental health problems. I do still get stressed, I have to say. But I'm doing a job I love with great people who I can point to here, and Pete, wherever you are. So, I'm grateful for that. So as I said, don't get me wrong, I'm still on a journey. And those of you that know me, and I'm looking at some of them there, probably think I do need that refresher course on managing your anxiety and speaking with confidence and things like that, but I'm getting there, and it's still a journey. But it's not just that shift from being unemployed to employed, it's all the stuff in between, which hopefully I've told you today about. It's the ups and downs, it's the setbacks and the progress, and it has been a bit like a roller coaster. And when I think about those 17 years, the ones that I called the wasted years, I wasn't just existing in an empty void. There was actually a lot going on, and as I've realised more and more, there was a lot going on, and I've taken the journey again, really, looking back and preparing for today. The most difficult thing about mental illness, I think, is the loss that's involved. And that still actually can make me feel quite sad, but I choose not to focus on it too much. My mental illness meant that I didn't get married to my fiancé. I didn't have children, and I didn't get to teach in a school, which was my dream. And all those things are absolutely huge. But I think it's fair to say we can all identify life can take us into unexpected places. And for me, it's been about accepting what has been and doing something positive about it. And as a believing Christian, it's about believing for me that life is precious and has a purpose. So I'm going to say at the end of this talk to conclude that I have reclaimed those wasted years because they've made me the person that I am today. Who you see now here today is the product of all those experiences, good and bad. As I said, I can still find life quite hard, I still get stressed, and I still have my vulnerabilities. But I'm living, I'm employed, I love my job, and I now have everything I need to believe that I do have a future. Thank you.